The motel room, the rain hadn't stopped for hours. The windshield wipers groaned back and forth, barely keeping up with the sheets of water that hammered against the glass. David tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the pale yellow lines on the highway blurring with each flick of the wipers. He had been driving since morning, the kind of aimless road trip that was supposed to be freeing. But somewhere between state lines and long stretches of empty forest roads, he realized how alone he truly was. His phone had no signal, the gas gauge flirted dangerously with empty, and the next town was miles away. That's when the neon glow appeared through the curtain of rain, flickering letters that spelled out Motel. The place looked abandoned from a distance. The sign buzzed with a faint hum, and several letters had long since gone dark. A single light illuminated the lobby entrance, casting the building in a yellow haze that only made it look more unwelcoming. Still, it was the only shelter for miles, and the storm was worsening. David pulled into the cracked asphalt lot, water pooling around his tires, and stared at the rows of doors with peeling paint and broken blinds. He hesitated, hand hovering over the ignition, telling himself he could just push forward, find something better. But exhaustion won. He killed the engine and stepped into the storm. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew, like wet carpet left to rot. A thin man behind the desk greeted him without a smile, his expression flat, his eyes oddly vacant. One night, he asked, voice low and monotone. David nodded, dripping water onto the tile floor, trying not to stare at the deep shadows that pooled in the corners of the lobby. The man slid a key across the counter, an actual brass key attached to a large plastic tag labeled Room 6. No paperwork, no ID check, not even a glance at the credit card David clumsily offered. Just the key. The silence pressed in heavier than the rain outside. Room 6 was at the far end of the row, and David noticed as he walked past the other doors that many looked untouched for years. Some had tape crisscrossed over the windows. Others had doorknobs missing. The door to Room 6 groaned when he pushed it open, revealing a room that smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. The carpet was stained, the bedspread worn thin, and the only piece of decor was a crooked painting of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow him no matter where he stood. David tried to laugh it off. A bed was a bed, and he was too tired to care. He tossed his backpack into the corner and locked the door, but as the night deepened, he realized sleep wouldn't come easy. Every sound outside seemed magnified. The wind against the thin window, the groaning of the pipes in the wall, the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway. At first, David told himself it was just other guests, but when he peeked through the blinds, he saw the lot was empty except for his own car. The motel, it seemed, was deserted. Then, at 2:17 a.m., he heard it. A knock. Soft at first, then louder. Room 6. Someone, or something, was at his door. The knock didn't stop. 3 sharp raps, then silence. David froze on the bed, pulse thudding in his ears, every muscle locked. He told himself it could be the wind, maybe the old building shifting under the storm. But then it came again, slower this time, deliberate. Whoever it was knew he was inside. David tiptoed to the door, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing, just the hiss of rain outside. With trembling fingers, he peeked through the peephole. The hallway was emptied. He stepped back, forcing a nervous laugh. His mind was playing tricks, that's all. He was exhausted. The storm outside was relentless, and his imagination was running wild. But just as he tried to calm down, the knock came again, this time from the window. David's head snapped toward the sound, heart hammering in his chest. The curtains hung heavy over the glass, and though the dim light from the parking lot filtered in faintly, he couldn't see who, or what, was out there. Slowly, he approached, hand twitching as he reached for the curtain. Before he could pull it back, something scraped against the glass. Long, deliberate drags, like fingernails scratching to be let in. David staggered back, panic flooding his chest. He grabbed his backpack, ready to leave the room and drive away, storm or not. He fumbled with the lock, but froze as he realized. Whoever had been knocking, scratching, circling his room, they hadn't gone away. What if they were waiting in the hallway? His only way out led directly into the unknown. Sweat beaded his forehead as he debated whether it was safer to stay locked inside or risk running into whatever stalked outside. That's when he noticed something chilling. The painting. The crooked portrait of the woman on the wall. Her face wasn't the same anymore. The eyes weren't just following him. The mouth had shifted into a faint, unsettling smile. The air grew heavy, suffocating, as though the room itself was pressing in on him. The storm outside roared louder, but inside room 6, it was dead silent except for the faint scrape at the window. David backed toward the bathroom, clutching the doorknob like a lifeline. He couldn't take his eyes off the painting, its twisted grin seeming to widen the longer he stared. His breath came in shallow gasps. Then, the bathroom light flickered on by itself. He hadn't touched the switch. Something was already inside with him. David dropped his bag and bolted for the door, yanking it open and spilling into the hallway. The lights overhead flickered, the storm's rumble echoing through the thin walls. The hallway was empty, but it felt wrong, like someone had just stepped out of sight. He sprinted toward the lobby, shoes squeaking on the wet linoleum, desperate to escape. But when he pushed open the lobby door, his stomach dropped. The desk was empty. The clerk was gone, and taped to the counter was a single yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "3 travelers found dead in local motel room. Suspect never identified." Great. I'll keep the momentum going and escalate the danger inside the motel while still planting seeds of psychological doubt. Here's part 3 of the motel room. 3 true horror stories. Part 3, Story 1. The motel room continued. David's hands shook as he lifted the clipping from the counter. The paper was brittle with age, edges curled, but the ink was still legible. The victims' faces stared up at him. 3 grainy photographs of men and women who looked eerily ordinary. The article mentioned signs of forced entry, unexplained injuries, and the chilling detail that each body had been discovered in the very same room 6. The motel had supposedly closed years ago after the investigation went cold. David's stomach twisted. If the motel had been shut down, how was he standing here now? And who, or what, had checked him in? A faint thud echoed down the hallway behind him, pulling his eyes from the article. It was slow, heavy, almost like footsteps dragging across the floor. He backed away from the counter, hard in his throat, clutching the newspaper like a shield. "Hello," he called out, voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The thuds grew louder, closer. The lights above him flickered again, buzzing angrily before plunging the lobby into half-darkness. The storm outside rattled the glass doors, but the real terror came from the hallway he had just fled. The shadows seemed thicker now, stretching unnaturally, as if something was moving within them. David darted toward the exit, pushing against the front doors with all his strength, but they didn't budge. He shoved harder, panic rising, until he realized the truth. They weren't locked. They were nailed shut. Rusty nails lined the edges of the doorframe, hammered deep into the wood, sealing him in. His breath came fast and uneven as he stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. That's when he saw it. Behind the counter where the clerk had been sitting earlier, the crooked shape of a figure hunched low, unmoving. He hadn't noticed it before, but now, as the light flickered weakly, it looked like a person crouched in the shadows, watching. "Hey," David shouted, though fear turned his voice into a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. But as he stared harder, he realized with horror that it wasn't crouching, it was hanging. A rope dangled from the ceiling, the body swaying ever so slightly, as though it had been there for a long time. His stomach lurched, while rising in his throat. And then the corpse's head tilted. Slowly, unnaturally, it twisted toward him, eyes black and hollow, mouth stretched into the same smile as the woman in the painting. David screamed and bolted down the nearest hallway, the sound of dragging footsteps chasing after him, faster this time. He didn't dare look back. Every door he passed was sealed, some with boards nailed across, others covered in warning tape. The walls seemed to close in, the building groaning under the weight of the storm and something far darker. At the very end of the hallway, one door stood open, a faint light spilling out. With no other choice, he sprinted toward it, praying it wasn't another trap. David reached the end of the hallway, his lungs burning, his legs weak from adrenaline. The open door glowed with a strange, sickly light, yellowish and too steady to be candlelight, yet not quite as harsh as fluorescent bulbs. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but the dragging footsteps behind him were faster now, echoing against the walls like chains being pulled across the floor. With no other choice, he shoved the door open and stumbled inside. slamming it shut behind him. The noise outside stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the chase. The room wasn't like the others. It was spotless, too clean, as though it didn't belong in the same building. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains pressed neatly against the wall, and the carpet looked freshly vacuumed. But what made David's skin crawl was the table in the center of the room. Spread across it were dozens of photographs, grainy Polaroids, each one depicting different guests. Their faces were frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouths twisted mid-scream. David shuffled closer, his hand trembling as he picked one up. His stomach dropped. The man in the photo was the clerk who had checked him in. The same lifeless smile stared back at him that he flipped through more. Some faces were faded, decades old. Others looked recent, too recent. One showed a woman clutching the bed frame in room 6, her mouth open in a silent cry. Another showed a teenage boy staring at the motel window as something pressed against the glass from outside. Then David's blood ran cold. The last photo on the table was of him. He was standing in the lobby, holding the newspaper clipping taken just minutes ago. His hands shook so violently that he dropped the photo, stumbling back toward the door. Before he could grab the handle, the bathroom door creaked open on its own. David's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, painfully slow, the door revealed a mirror inside the bathroom. But the reflection wasn't right. It didn't show the room, or him. Instead, it showed room 6, dimly lit, with the crooked painting and the unmade bed. And sitting on the bed was David himself. Only this version was pale, motionless, with dark sockets where his eyes should have been. The reflection twitched, its head jerking up as if it had just noticed him watching. David staggered backward, slamming against the table, the Polaroids scattering across the floor. The silence broke. From the hallway came a low, guttural sound, like dozens of voices whispering at once, overlapping, rising into a fevered chant. The lights in the spotless room began to dim, and the reflection in the bathroom mirror stood up. Slowly, deliberately, its hollow gaze fixed on him. The whispers outside grew louder, a chorus of voices pressing against the walls, rattling the air like a hive of bees. David's chest tightened as he stared into the bathroom mirror, watching his eyeless reflection rise from the bed in room 6. Its movements were jerky at first, stiff like a puppet learning how to walk. Then, with horrifying smoothness, it turned its head toward him. The empty sockets seemed to bore through the glass, the way a predator locks onto prey. David's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The reflection stepped closer in its world, though the bathroom itself was still empty. David stumbled forward, staring into the glass as his doppelganger moved closer with each step, the background of room 6 fading into black. He pressed his hand against the mirror without realizing it, trying to convince himself this wasn't real. That's when the reflection did the same. Only, it didn't align. Its hand met his, but the fingers spread wider, longer, pressing against the glass like claws. A thin crack spiderwebbed from the point of contact, splintering outward with a sharp, high-pitched squeal. David tore his hand away, heart pounding, but the reflection didn't mimic him anymore. It stayed pressed against the glass, pushing harder, the crack deepening. Shards began to flake off, and David realized with sick terror that it wasn't a mirror at all. It was a window, and something on the other side was breaking through. He grabbed a chair from the table, smashing it against the bathroom door to block it, but the chanting voices outside the hallway surged louder, almost gleeful, as though urging the thing on. Then the glass gave way. A jagged hand punched through, shards scattering across the floor like ice. The reflection pulled itself forward, first the head, then the torso, squeezing through the shattered frame as if the laws of reality didn't apply. Up close, David saw it clearly, his own face, pale and stretched, with a grin that split impossibly wide. Black ichor dripped from the empty sockets, pooling on the floor where it hissed like acid. The air reeked of rot. David scrambled backward toward the door, fumbling at the knob, but it wouldn't turn. Sealed, like the others, the doppelganger crouched low, tilting its head in a grotesque imitation of curiosity. Then, in a voice that was his own but distorted, hollow, it whispered, "You're not supposed to leave." The words rattled inside David's skull like broken glass. "You're not supposed to leave." His breath came in sharp, panicked bursts as the doppelganger unfolded itself from the mirror frame. long limbs bending unnaturally. It stood taller than him now, hunched under the low ceiling, its grin impossibly wide. The whispers outside swelled to a deafening roar, vibrating through the walls as if the building itself were alive, cheering the creature on. David lunged at the door again, wrenching the knob with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. He slammed his shoulder against it. Once, twice, until finally the doorframe splintered, and he tumbled back into the hallway. The corridor stretched out before him, but it wasn't the same as before. The lights overhead pulsed red, then white, then red again, bathing the walls in a sickly rhythm like a beating heart. Doors rattled violently on both sides, something unseen pounding from within each room. Shadows seeped through the cracks under the doors, spreading across the floor like oil. Behind him, the doppelganger emerged, dragging its claws along the walls, the sound a screech that made David's ears ring. Its movements were wrong, sometimes jerky, sometimes too smooth, as though it shifted between human and inhuman in each step. David ran, shoes slapping against the warped linoleum, his lungs screaming for air. The hallway twisted, branching where it hadn't before. He turned left, then right, realizing too late that the building didn't follow normal architecture anymore. The motel had become a maze, doors leading into endless corridors, staircases looping back onto the same floor. Every corner he turned, the doppelganger was there, or a version of it, always just far enough away to make him believe he might escape, only for it to close the distance again. Its laughter, his laughter, echoed through the halls that he ducked into one of the rooms, slamming the door shut and dragging a dresser against it. The room was filthy, decayed, its wallpaper peeled down to rotting wood. He collapsed against the bed, gasping, trying to quiet his breathing. For a moment, all he could hear was the storm outside, rain pounding the window like desperate hands. Then, silence. No footsteps. No whispers. Nothing. He almost allowed himself to believe he'd lost it. Until the old TV in the corner flickered on. Static filled the screen before sharpening into an image. David, sitting on the bed, in this very room. Only he wasn't moving. His mirrored self stared blankly at the camera, head slowly tilting. Then, on the screen, the doppelganger smiled. David's reflection raised a hand and pointed, not at the camera, not at the room, but directly at him. At the exact moment the screen went black, the sound of claws scraping against the dresser filled the silence. The dresser groaned as unseen claws dragged across it, pushing, shaking, inching it away from the door. David staggered to his feet, eyes darting to the flickering TV that had gone dark. He wanted to smash it, but deep down, he feared what might happen if he touched it. His only choice was the window. He rushed to it, tearing at the curtains, but when he looked outside, his breath caught in his throat. There was no rain, no parking lot, no neon sign. Only endless rows of the motel itself stretching into the horizon, each building stacked on another like a repeating pattern, infinite and impossible. The claws ripped the dresser aside. The door shuddered, cracked open. David didn't think. He bolted into the bathroom. But instead of grimy tiles and a stained tub, the door swung open to reveal another hallway. A perfect copy of the one outside. He hesitated for only a second before plunging in, the sound of the door behind him splintering as the doppelganger forced its way through. This hallway was darker, longer, and the lights overhead didn't flicker, they bled. Each bulb dripped a thick black liquid onto the floor, sizzling where it touched. David ran blindly, every door identical, every corridor looping back into itself. His lungs burned, his legs shook, but the fear drove him onward. Then, ahead, he saw something different. A door slightly ajar, golden light spilling from its edges. He skidded to a stop, clutching the frame. Inside was a small, cluttered office. Papers littered the desk, and in the center sat a ledger bound in cracked leather. His hands trembled as he flipped it open. Names filled the pages, hundreds of them, scrawled in hurried handwriting. Each entry ended with the same word, taken. His eyes scanned frantically until he found his own name, written in red ink, the only word beside it, pending. A chill tore through him. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a system, a machine, something ancient and cruel that marked its victims, luring them into room 6 like flies into a web. And his time was almost up. David stuffed the ledger under his arm and turned to flee, but the office door slammed shut behind him. The lights flickered, and from the shadows of the room emerged not one, but several figures. They crawled out of the dark corners, pale and eyeless, their faces twisted into mockeries of his own. The doppelganger hadn't been alone. There were dozens. The creatures encircled him, their movements synchronized, grins widening as the chanting from the hallways bled into the room. The ledger fell from his hands, its pages flipping violently as though caught in a storm. And then, all at once, the figures stopped, their heads snapping in unison toward the door. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. Something else was coming, something worse than them. The sound of the footsteps grew heavier, each one vibrating through the floorboards like the toll of a massive drum. The eyeless doppelgangers froze in place, their twisted grins slackening, as if even they feared what was approaching. David pressed himself against the far wall, chest heaving, as the office door creaked slowly open. Darkness poured in first, so thick it seemed alive, curling like smoke. Then came the shape that it ducked low to enter, too tall for the doorway, its shoulders scraping the frame with a nails-on chalkboard screech. At first, David thought it was a man, a giant, but the longer he looked, the less human it became. Its body was a shifting mass of blackened limbs, dozens of arms and legs twitching as though stolen from others, stitched together into a single hulking figure. Its face, if it could be called that, was a collage of features, eyes, mouths, fragments of expressions, all belonging to different people. And in the center, glaring down at him, was his own face, stretched and grotesque, fused to the others like a trophy. The smaller doppelgangers dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in unison. The thing stepped forward, every movement accompanied by the groan of bones cracking and flesh tearing. Its central mouth opened, jagged teeth grinding as it spoke in a voice that shook the room. "You are the last one." David's legs nearly gave out. The ledger's pages flipped wildly on the floor, names blurring together until the word "taken" glowed like fire on every line. He realized then what this was. The motel wasn't just haunted, it was feeding. Each soul who checked in was claimed, absorbed, their identities twisted into this growing monstrosity. And now it wanted him. His reflection had only been the lure. This thing was the collector. Adrenaline cut through the terror. David snatched the ledger from the floor, clutching it tight, and bolted past the bowing doppelgangers. The giant creature lunged, its many arms shooting out like spears, ripping through the walls as plaster rained down. David barely dodged, sprinting through the doorway and back into the endless hallway maze. The lights overhead popped one by one, plunging everything into strobing darkness as the monster's footsteps thundered after him, rattling the motel to its core. He didn't know where he was running, only that he had to keep moving. Hallways stretched, bent, looped in impossible directions. Doors slammed open on their own, spilling glimpses of other victims. Faces pressed to windows, people frozen mid-scream, shadows clawing at ceilings. The motel was collapsing in on itself, bending reality to trap him inside. And always, just a few steps behind, came the collector, its voices a chorus of every soul it had consumed, including his own. David's legs screamed with every step, but the motel wouldn't end. Corridors twisted into one another like a labyrinth designed to crush his spirit. He could hear the collector behind him, those endless footsteps, that grinding chorus of voices. Every time he dared to glance back, its hulking frame loomed closer, its countless arms reaching through the walls, tearing through door frames, clawing at him from impossible angles. The smaller doppelgangers scuttled along the ceiling and walls, snapping their jaws like feral animals. Hurting him deeper into the maze, he burst into another room, slamming the door and throwing himself against it, though he knew it wouldn't hold. His chest heaved as his eyes darted around. This one was different, a shrine. Dozens of photographs covered the walls, pinned like trophies. Some were burnt at the edges, others drenched in dried, blackened stains. Each photo showed a victim the motel had claimed, their faces twisted in agony. In the center, directly opposite the bed, hung a fresh Polaroid. His face, taken from just seconds ago. David staggered back, while burning his throat. The collector didn't just take their lives, it kept their likeness, their memory, their very existence. And if it got him, He would become just another frame on the wall, another name written taken. His trembling hand brushed against the ledger, still clutched tight against his chest. For the first time, he noticed something odd. The red ink marking his name wasn't fully dry. The letters smudged slightly under his thumb, as if the decision wasn't final. Pending. A thread of hope flickered. The door exploded inward. The doppelgangers poured in first, crawling like spiders, jaws unhinged as they shrieked in distorted versions of his own voice. Then came the collector, its mass of bodies pushing through the broken frame, eyes and mouths screaming in unison. David backed into the far corner, clutching the ledger, feeling its weight pulsing like a heartbeat in his hands. He realized then, this book wasn't just a record. It was a contract, maybe even a prison. If he could break it, maybe he could end this nightmare. But how? The pages writhed under his grip, as though the book itself resisted him. The collector's many arms reached closer, plaster cracking, floorboards splintering. The photographs on the walls shook violently, some tearing free and fluttering into the air. Faces screamed silently as the room filled with the roar of the storm outside and the guttural chorus of the monster. For a moment, David's courage faltered. He was trapped, surrounded, with no way out. The motel wanted him. The collector wanted him. And unless he figured out how to use the ledger, he was already taken. The room shuddered as the collector forced its way inside, filling every corner, every gap, its writhing limbs blotting out the ceiling. The doppelgangers clung to the walls like grotesque shadows, their eyeless faces twitching as they grinned in unison. David clutched the ledger to his chest, the word pending glowing faintly under his name. The book pulsed like a heartbeat, and for a fleeting moment, he understood. This ledger wasn't only a record of the taken. It was the tether, the source of the motel's power. If he destroyed it, he might destroy everything. The collector lunged. David dove aside as a cluster of arms slammed into the wall, splintering wood and raining plaster dust. He stumbled onto the bed, ledger still in hand, and ripped at the pages. But they wouldn't tear. Each sheet hissed like flesh when he tried, resisting his strength. Desperate, he looked around for anything. Fire, water, anything to break it. His eyes landed on the lamp beside the bed. He smashed it, exposing the sparking wires. Electricity crackled wildly as he pressed the ledger against them. The book screamed. Not paper, not leather, the ledger lived. Its pages curled and blackened, inky tendrils lashing out to wrap around his wrists, fighting to stay whole. David gritted his teeth, forcing it harder against the sparking wires. Flames erupted, smoke choking the air as the Polaroids on the walls curled and shrieked, their trapped faces disintegrating into ash. The doppelgangers screeched, collapsing one by one, their bodies unraveling into black smoke. The collector roared, its countless mouths shrieking in pain as its body began to cave in, the stolen faces melting from its mass. The fire spread fast, consuming the room, the walls splitting open to reveal endless void outside. David staggered backward, clutching the burning ledger as the collector thrashed violently, its enormous body tearing the motel apart. Chunks of ceiling collapsed, sparks raining down. With a final surge of strength, David hurled the flaming ledger directly into the monster's central mouth, his own distorted face staring back at him. The collector convulsed, its voices shrieking in unison before imploding into a storm of ash and fire. Silence. For a moment, nothing but the crackle of flames and the soft patter of rain. David coughed, stumbling through the collapsing hallway until at last, doors. Real doors. He pushed through one, stumbling out into the night. The storm had calmed, the neon sign of the motel dark and broken, its structure collapsing into itself as though it had never been real. David stood trembling in the wet grass, staring back as the last of the building vanished into smoke. He was free, but as he staggered toward his car, the night eerily still, something caught his eye in the puddle by his feet. A reflection. His reflection. It grinned.